Hello and welcome to The Queer Gaze, a gay movie podcast dedicated to examining queer representation and issues.
And we are dropping some special TIFF coverage because we are both here in person. So instead of sticking to a theme, we're going to give you some quick takes on a bunch of different films. First up, we're going to be talking about Richard Linklater's Blue Moon.
Don't forget to follow us on social media at The Queer Gaze. Okay, so Joe, Richard Linklater and musicals.
Right, yes.
Are either of those things of great interest to you?
I'll confess, I don't have the strongest relationship to Richard Linklater, to the point where you reminded me that he and Ethan Hawke have actually worked together, and I realized I've never seen the Before Trilogy.
Which I dearly love. I saw the first one at exactly the right moment. I was at university, so watching a university student falling in love with Julie Delpy was right up my street. Talking about existential angst and being self-aware and all these kinds of things. Right. And then the second one, which dropped a decade later, was wandering around the streets of Paris, realizing that they've missed out on an opportunity for what could possibly have been the greatest love ever told. So, you know, and when that drops in sort of not midlife crisis, but quarter-life crisis, maybe, it's again perfectly timed. So I think one thing that I thought of is that people will think, watching this, that Ethan Hawke's loquacious machine gun delivery of pages and pages and pages of dialogue will be a new thing. But he's been doing this with Richard Linklater for years.
Right. Yeah, so folks, if you don't know what Blue Moon is, I mean, you'll probably hear all about it during Oscar season because Ethan Hawke is basically a shoo-in to get a nomination. But this follows one memorable evening in the life of Lorenz Hart, who is a composer of musicals, and he typically works with Richard Rodgers, who is played by Andrew Scott, and they have had a trial separation so that Rodgers could go and work with Hammerstein, who is played by Simon Delaney. And of course, Rodgers and Hammerstein should sound familiar because they went on to have a hugely successful producing career together, making musicals. So this is on the cusp of Oklahoma debuting. It's all one evening set in a bar. And as you said, Conrad, it's mostly monologues from Ethan Hawke. And the movie is never boring. It is quite dry and funny. And I really, really enjoyed this one.
Yeah, I really enjoyed it. It's very easy to say that something like this could be a theatre piece rather than a movie. But I was very impressed with the way that Richard Linklater managed to keep the camera moving and do interesting things in terms of the blocking and revealing spaces and revealing characters that have been sitting there the whole time.
Yes.
It was very dynamically done, but unintrusively, so it wasn't flashy for the sake of it. But the centerpiece really is Ethan Hawke's performance, so much so that you could almost be forgiven for forgetting that Margaret Qualley is here. Obviously made a big splash last year in The Substance, and she is here as the object of Hart's affection. He seems to be madly in love with, or madly in adoration with, a 20-year-old woman, although the way that he behaves towards some of the young guys that enter the bar makes me think he's not so interested in her, perhaps.
Yes, this is why we're covering this on The Queer Gaze as opposed to Movie Oubliette, which is where we're dropping some of our other TIFF coverage. Yeah, so the screenplay for this film is from novelist Robert Kaplow, which is quite the name, but it is based on the real-life letters between Hart and Wayland. So they were corresponding after a summer where she was hanging out with him at a theater camp while they were working on a different kind of musical. But yeah, I mean, it seems very clear that Hart would ordinarily identify as gay. He's actually very comfortable talking about his attraction to men. But then, as you said, he has this kind of adoration for Elizabeth. You know, he's brimming with affection for her. He thinks that she's so gorgeous and so erudite for being so young. And part of it almost plays like a kind of facade, right? It's, I think of the way I used to talk about women and how much I admired them before I was honest with myself and said, I don't actually want to sleep with them, though.
No, you just want to go shopping with them.
I want to bask in their fabulousness.
Yeah, exactly. And it's easy to bask in the fabulousness of Elizabeth because she is quite the stunning figure.
Oh, yeah, of course.
But we also have to enjoy the lovely Andrew Scott, who is playing Rogers. And it's a fascinating performance for me because his voice is so different.
Yes, he's putting on an American accent and it's completely flawless, but it almost takes you that moment, right, where you see Andrew Scott, you're so ready for the Irish brogue, and then out comes this flawless American, and you think, no, there's a disconnect here. Yeah. Something isn't right.
I know, it's very strange, but also he creates a very mellow character that has none of the tics that I've seen him imbue in previous performances. And I think it's actually the understated gem of this movie is Andrew Scott's performance, but maybe that's because I like Andrew Scott.
You fancy him so much, yes.
Yeah.
But he is very, very understated to the point where I actually think he will get lost. Like when people talk about this film, they will absolutely talk about Linklater and Hawke and the sort of dynamic duo being back in action. And it's, I think, also because Hawke has roughly 98% of the dialogue in this entire film. So he's just so hard to overlook, and Hart is such a giant character, which is hilarious because he's very diminutive. So we're doing some movie magic with how tall Ethan Hawke actually is. But I agree with you that I think without Rogers, we're losing some really valuable insight into who Lawrence is, because really the whole evening is about how he feels that he has been passed by his professional colleague. They have a working relationship of almost 20 years at this point, and he's basically been cast aside in favor of this new man whose dialogue and songwriting skills he abhors.
Yeah, he's such a snob. It's very witty. He's very, very cutting. It reminds you of Oscar Wilde, for example.
Yes, another queer figure who could cut a person down a peg or two.
Exactly. He's very particular about his own work. He's a lyricist, whereas Rogers is the musician, the composer of the tunes. Their most famous song is Blue Moon, of course, which he has come to loathe.
Of course.
Of course, as everyone always does with their most popular tune. And he thinks that Hammerstein's lyrics are crass and that Oklahoma is a piece of pop culture sentimentality with no depth and no substance and no meaning to it.
Right.
So in his art, he strives for some sort of higher form, higher quality. But in his own life, he seems to have a sentimentality and a romanticism to him it seems at odds with his ideals in terms of art. So it's an interesting juxtaposition, those two. So you've got that tension going on, and also this particular pivotal, literally, moment in his life when he is struggling with substance abuse and his work ethic, which is one of the reasons why Rogers moved on from him for this next project.
Yes.
And at the precipice of watching his artistic partner of decades seeming to move on and move up to another level. There is a wonderful visual reference to this where there is a party upstairs that everybody else moves up to. And poor Hart is left downstairs.
Yes.
In the bar.
In the bar, yes, where he is not meant to be drinking, but drinks all night. Yes. Okay, well, why don't we move into some slightly spoilery territory? So folks, we're both going to heartily recommend this movie. It's definitely worth checking out. It is kind of astounding how excellent the film ultimately is, despite, as you said, being almost stagey in the way that it is shot, but it's never boring. The camera is always moving. We're finding nooks and crannies to keep our visual interest. But I mean, I think at the end of the day, people are going to mostly remember this for Hawke's performance, and it should rightfully be celebrated. But we're going to talk about some other things that really caught our eye. So if you don't want to know anything else, go and check it out. And now, Conrad, Let's talk a little bit more about how this goes.
Yeah. So the key quote that I wrote down here is that although the film is incredibly funny, Hawke's dialogue, his observations about other people, his observations about himself
Yes.
are incredibly cutting, very accurate. But he says, I'm always serious. That's why people find me so funny. So the film is hilarious.
Yes.
But it's saying a lot.
It's almost a tragedy. And I'll admit, one of the things that I did not enjoy about the film, it's a tiny quibble, and it's probably more of a personal preference than it is a legitimate piece of criticism. The movie begins with us learning about Hart's death. So we see him collapse in an alleyway in the rain where he is obviously heavily intoxicated. He cannot get himself back up. And then we hear a radio broadcast about his death. And it does help to set the stage because it gives us a little bit of insight, background character exposition about, the work that he did. In case you aren't familiar with the songs, it's like, here's 20 different things. You're going to know at least a couple of them. And then we go into the film proper. And I don't love it as a device that sort of says, well, now you know he's going to die. But on the flip side, it does definitely help us to appreciate every sort of meaningful exchange throughout the rest of the film. There's this air of pathos and inevitable tragedy where you just keep thinking, he's not going to be able to do any of this because we know he's going to die.
Yeah. I was thinking about this after the screening because you made this, oddly enough, coincidental point before we went into it about your preferred style of biopic, which is not something that attempts to cram somebody's entire life into a 4-act structure, but instead something that focuses on a meaningful moment in their life. And they've picked exactly the right moment for this.
Agreed.
If you don't have the scene at the beginning where you know he dies 7 months later, you could watch this whip-smart, hilariously funny but tragic character that you fall in love with throughout the course of it, that ends on this hopeful note of, I am going to try and get on the wagon and work with you again. We're going to do this revival of our previous hit and then go on to new things.
Yes.
And then you're cut to black, and then you get the inevitable text telling you what happened next.
He
died. Merry Christmas. Enjoy that as you leave the theater.
Right.
And that's not going to be a nice feeling for anyone.
No. Yeah, in some ways, I do think this is a smarter creative choice because it helps the audience to feel every one of those dangling moments where you think, oh, but we know it's not going to end that way. Or even if there is that glimmer of hope, it's going to be squashed, and it kind of makes the film feel that much weightier, more memorable in some ways. I think it's that initially I was put off because I thought, well, this is often used as a bit of lazy storytelling. We're going to begin in media res, and then we're going to show you how we got here, or we're going to tip our hat to make sure you're interested at the start because we don't have a ton of things happening in the first act. So I'll confess that's not what the film is actually doing, but initially my first response was, fuck off. Why are you doing this?
Yeah, because it could be seen as just manipulative.
Yeah.
I don't think it is, because if you think about the alternative, it really doesn't work. It would have just set you out on a real low. Whereas in this, you leave with a real appreciation for who he was and what he was struggling with in so many ways.
Yeah. Now, question for you. Do you think that this film will still work for people if they don't have a relationship to things like Richard Linklater or musicals, or if they don't know who Hart is? Does it still function?
I think it does, because shock horror, despite having my pink triangle badge, I do not like musicals. Never have.
Yes, please hand in your gay card.
Yes, will do now. But I did enjoy this.
Yes.
They do say that, great films, great documentaries as well, they teach you something about a subject that you know nothing about and make you interested in it. And this definitely does that. So even if you don't know the story behind the creation of Oklahoma or Blue Moon back to front, you will still find this riveting just because of the performances and because of the stakes.
Yeah.
There's a lot of stakes here.
There is a lot of stakes. And I think it sounds quite serious from our discussion, but I will say this film is a comedy through and through. Like you said, he's very cutting, but it's not just this sort of bitchy humor throughout. There's a lot of that, particularly with Hammerstein, because he's obviously professionally jealous of the person who has replaced him. But so much of it also plays like self-directed hatred, which is why I think we both agreed ultimately this was a good fit for the queer gaze, because there's so many gay trademarks in the way that he reads other people, but also the way that he's very almost dismissive and cruel to himself, right? Like,
Yeah.
he's being very honest, but also at the expense of everyone in the room, and that includes himself.
Yeah, it does. But it's no surprise that a man who was so brilliant with words in terms of his art is such a witty raconteur, because every single choice, and he appreciates the choice of words from other people.
Truly.
He savors words in all their forms.
He would be critiquing us for our lazy choice of words.
Sure. I'm sure he would be.
No, I do think that's one of the other areas the film will ultimately get recognized is the screenplay by Kaplow.
Yeah.
Because this is crackling dialogue.
Yeah. It's the sort of stuff you just do not get in the multiplex on a regular basis.
No, it's true.
So highly recommended from me. I really enjoyed it. As a way to start off my TIFF experience, this was not half bad at all.
Yeah, I went in with no expectations and walked out a big fan.
Yeah, me too.
All right. Well, folks, keep an eye out for other TIFF reviews. We're sort of doing mini versions of episodes. So if you like what you hear, do let us know if you plan to check out the film, if you maybe have seen it and you're listening to this down the line. But yeah, stay tuned for more.
Yeah.